Hey everybody, it is Amy here, Editor-in-Chief of the Austin Common, and today we're going to be talking all about the Texas Legislature. I am sure this is something that has been top of mind for many people. If you've been seeing in the news, all kinds of things are happening with the Texas Legislature lately, and today we're going to break it all down for you, explain to you how the legislature works, what the heck is happening, and answer some of your questions. So I am just going to wait another minute or two for our guest to come on. Stephanie, she is a Texas Lege staffer, and she is part of the Over The Lege podcast and show, which is amazing, funny, really helps people understand what's happening at the legislature in a fun way. So I'm going to bring her on. Here we go. And she's loaded in here in a second. And then we're going to dive into the conversation. For people who are joining, if you have questions, hey!
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, I've never done this before. Yay!
Well, you know what? You logged on pretty easy. That was pretty painless.
Thank you. Your instructions were impeccable.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. I was just telling everyone who's logging on now that we are going to be talking all about the Texas Legislature. And if you have questions, you can add a comment or use the little question button there below and ask it, and we will try to get through them as well. And yeah, I'm so glad you're able to take the time today. Do you want to maybe briefly introduce yourself and tell folks kind of how you gained all of this Texas Lege knowledge?
You got it. Well, thanks for having me. This is one of my favorite things to do, is to teach people about the Texas Legislature, especially people who don't know anything, because then I feel really smart when I tell them like just how to look up bills. So my name is Stephanie. I've worked in the building since 2007. I've worked both in the House as a staffer, and I'm currently, and then in the Senate, and I came back to the House. I'm currently a chief of staff. Got a master's degree from the LBJ school, and I decided to focus on public service versus some of the other, like not international policy. And that's where most of my experience comes from, is just being in the building and then being a general rabble rouser. My mom and I had a really nice moment recently where we used to think that I was a troublemaker as a kid, but I was like, you know what? Like, I didn't get pregnant. I didn't do drugs. I didn't get grades. I've just been a policymaker since a very young age. And I've always questioned authority, and she just happened to be authority. So now I get to take my middle child vibes to the ledge.
There you go. A little rebranding. Rabble rouser sounds cool and powerful.
Thank you. Thank you.
And then you're also the creator and a writer with Over The Lege, which as a, civic enthusiast, I love the idea of, do you want to tell people really quickly what is Over The Lege?
Please, yes. So Over the Lege, Lege, is a Saturday Night Live meets the Colbert Report meets Solid Gold, if anyone's old enough to remember that show, about just the Texas Legislature. So we started as a theater show with sketches and songs about the Texas Lege. So we had one about, I don't want to be too current, one about untested rape kits. And so we had women dressed up like rape kits in these boxes standing outside the DMV, like asking people to give money to test them, which you think is a joke, but that's the law. That's the law we passed, was that you get to request that. We did another one about how we open every show with kind of the game show style. So one was like, name your state senator. A lot of people don't know that we have a state legislature versus a federal legislature. Another one was like, so you think you can vote? And this poor girl had to show her baby teeth to prove that she could vote. So we try to have really topical sketches that make people laugh, and then we edutain them. They don't even know that they're getting educated about the Texas Legislature because we're so funny. We went to a podcast during COVID, and we've stayed there right now. I hope to get back. I hope next spring at the Long Center we'll do a live show again.
Cool. Okay, so then people will tag you all when we post this after, but people can find the podcast, I guess, Over the Ledge, any podcast they use, app, probably find it. Okay, cool.
Yes, at Over the Lege. And we just finished season 2. We had Senator Watson on our last episode. I think it was our best episode ever. So I encourage you to listen to that one.
Cool. Okay, so let's get into it.
Okay.
Obviously, there's been a ton happening with the legislature super recently. Maybe we'll back it up a little bit. I have been to, I think I went to one of your Texas Ledge 101 classes like a few years ago and loved it. I still have like the printout you gave.
That makes me feel so
and use
wonderful.
it. So I thought maybe we could start by you walking through a little bit of the basics. So we have a Texas legislature is our state legislature. And just though like the national level, we've got a House and a Senate, right? Can you just explain like what's the very basic structure of the legislature?
You got it. So we have a bicameral legislature, House and Senate. Each, there are 31 senators and 150 House members. And that's intentional. The House is really supposed to represent the people, while the Senate is kind of like the bald eagle view, representing a much larger constituency. According to law, every member has to represent exactly the same number of people. So every representative represents about 185,000 people, and every senator, I think, represents almost 880,000. Don't fact check that. It's those are Fox News facts. Close, pretty close, because each person is supposed to have equal representation. And then the governor is independently elected every 4 years. So is the lieutenant governor, so is the attorney general, and so is the comptroller. That's kind of your main state races. There's also like an ag commissioner that I know everyone knows his name, Sid Miller. You're right. Reps run every 2 years, like they have to be elected every 2 years, and then senators run every 4 years, and they're off a step. So 15 of them run, every other year. It's like the World Cup, right? They switch every 2 years. A bill has to get through both chambers exactly the same way, and then it goes to the governor, who can veto the legislation, who can sign the legislation, or it can become law without his signature, which means he's kind of like, fine. I'm just a little gross. And nothing is fair at the legislature. I think that's the number one rule, that people think that there are rules, and there are, but they're more like pirate guidelines than anything else. And the only thing that you are guaranteed is that you may file a bill. A legislator can file a bill that does anything they want. After that, it's all Hunger Games.
Yeah. So before we get into the process of how a bill becomes a law, because I know that's super crazy, let's start with just explaining a little bit more about the leadership. So you have, the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker of the House. Maybe can you break down like what the three of them do as it pertains to lawmaking and kind of what their roles are?
Well, technically, none of them should be making laws at all. That's not their job. Right? But the speaker is elected by the members of the House every 2 years. So it's always been a man. He's one of the 150. He can't introduce any bills himself. He has to have what we call your lieutenants, which are kind of your leaders on the floor. So they have an agenda. All three of them have an agenda, but they have to find other people to file their bills. Nobody can just file. I mean, I'm sure Greg Abbott wants to and will find a way, but technically he can't file a bill with his name on it. Lieutenant governor, though, is elected by the people. It's a statewide race. So again, he can't introduce any bills. But the Senate and the House are structured slightly differently. So the House really follows the rules, right? There are rules for them. Generally, Speaker Phelan is a process person. He lets the process work himself out. So is Joe Strauss before him. You can look up Craddock. I can't think of his name right now. Tom Craddock. There's a video on YouTube where they try to remove him from his chair as president of the chamber, and he refuses. It's this big, wonderful blow up and abuse. It's so exciting. It's 2007. We'll do it later. So generally, the House I mean, what the speaker wants and what the lieutenant governor wants generally happens, but how they make that happen is a little different. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick controls everything, like Thanos kind of iron fist. Like I said, nothing is fair. So the lieutenant governor and the speaker of the House, they both pick committee chairs. In the House, there's a seniority order where you are required to get your seniority pick. That's in the rules, not in the Senate. Lieutenant governor can pick anyone to do anything at any time. He can fire anyone at any time if he doesn't like the way they're handling their meetings. He fired one senator, I don't know why I can see his face, because he didn't like how he talked to one of the lieutenant governor's staff. So he downgraded him from a chairmanship. So when people think that the members have authority or autonomy or power, kind of not really. It depends on what the speaker and the lieutenant governor want. So way back in time, they're both like presidents of the body, procedural presidents. But the person who has the real power, Texas cannabis today, I know you were just asking this, are the parliamentarians, and nobody talks about the parliamentarians. But for those of us who went to school, we had Robert's Rules of Order. I mean, if there's one career you should get in right now, it would be a parliamentarian, because they know the rules and then they're constantly whispering to both lieutenant governor and the chair. If you're ever watching, they're like, and then they're like, I will not sustain that point of order. I cannot answer a hypothetical question. The parliamentarian is enforcing the rules.
Yeah, and there it's true. Like if you're watching, if you ever show up to a hearing or something, a session, I think for a lot of people that person seems so weird. You're like, who is that person who's sitting up there in the front whispering all the time? And so they're just like they're not an elected body, right? Or
No.
they're just someone who's like the professional who's like, I know all the rules. I've read this book 1,000 times. They're that person.
They're like me. They're like they serve at the pleasure of either the speaker or the lieutenant governor. And going back to that Craddock event, I mean, it was so exciting because the parliamentarian quit on the dais. And I feel like she scribbled it on a napkin. I might be embellishing it, but a member called to remove the chair, which means tell Craddock he had to leave the dais so that they could vote on a new speaker. And Craddock refused to recognize him. And the parliamentarian was like, it's an appropriate point of inquiry. You've got to, and Craddock wouldn't do it. And so she was like, I'm out of here. Very exciting. It really was pretty cool. Yes. So the parliamentarian enforces the rules, but you'll remember back in the filibuster with Wendy Davis, the parliamentarian in the Senate found that talking about a bill about ultrasounds during an abortion was not germane, which means it didn't relate to this bill about abortion. So it's not logical. It's not logical. And that's pretty frustrating. That's one of the things. That's one thing to take away. It's not about logic. It's about 100%. And when they told you life isn't high school, it is. The Texas Legislature is high school, and lately it feels like junior high. It's just the truth.
And so you've got the speaker of the House and you've got the lieutenant governor who's like in charge of the Senate. And then the governor, like you said, can't pass laws or things, but you always hear him come up with, he releases his priorities often, right? So he just publicly says like, this is the stuff I would like to be seen. And generally that gets worked on, right? I mean, that's kind of the process.
Yes. Now, he's never called me personally. He's never responded to any of my inquiries, but they work on this stuff in advance behind closed doors. It's not like he's just like, please, someone. And Lois Colcourse is like, I will take your bathroom bill. Like, they have conversations behind closed doors. So the structure of Texas government is that we're supposed to have a lead governor, but both Rick Perry, the previous governor, and Greg Abbott have turned it into a pretty powerful position. And that's because they can name commissioners, they can appoint people to specific offices, to state offices. And technically the Senate is supposed to confirm any nominations. But if he chooses to nominate someone when they're not in session, then there's no confirmation process. So you might have noticed that right after session, surprise, Greg Abbott nominated like 5 people to positions. right? So he circumvents the will of the people and the Senate he's following the rules. And I think that's one thing that people need to know, Republicans, Democrats, the crazy fringes, like, it's in the rules. These are in the rules. So I think it's just shitty. Pardon me, Instagram, right? It's not illegal. It's just shitty.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So is the current walkout.
Mm-hmm.
It's not illegal. They just broke a rule, right? The rule's there. It says you need a quorum on the floor. Well, there's not a quorum, right? They didn't bust anything.
Right.
Okay, so the governor has his priorities, and then depending on how much money the governor has, right? So like I said, nothing's fair and everything's about politics. So people have to decide, am I going to do the governor's bidding or not? So the governor has a war chest, I don't know, 30 million, 40 million, $50 million. And just to put that in perspective, my boss has about $170,000. He's a House member. They're different races. And 100 of it is a loan to himself. Right? So $50 million, that's a lot of money to run radio ads and TV ads and social media ads. So a senator who might raise $1.5 million in a race, they've got to ask themselves, do I do what the governor wants or do I not? Mm-hmm. The lieutenant governor and the speaker, they have huge war chests also. So if you want to be an idealist, that's the word, idealist, you've got one session. Right? You can, one session, get it all done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
ICD and Philip Moore. Okay, that's what I got.
Okay, cool. So I want to talk a little bit about like kind of how a bill becomes a law lightly. I know there's like a whole bunch of complication in it, but I think it illustrates a little bit of what you're talking about because I think this is something that's confusing for folks too. It's like, you'll see like thousands of bills are filed like right before one session is starting, like everyone has 1,000 things, but my understanding is, well, depending on what the bill is, but it's very difficult for something to even get passed, even sometimes bills that it seems like everyone agrees on, like somehow Democrats and Republicans both like, sometimes those bills don't even make it through for some reason or another. And you're like, how? So can you talk a little bit about, I guess, the way it's designed and kind of how these things, how it can either push through bills or just kind of stop them, even if people like them?
Great. Yes. I had a good point and I lost it. Okay, the Texas Lege is purposely designed to be slow and annoying. Mm-hmm. And you want that. You want that. I want it, you want it, everybody should want it, because it's supposed to stop tyrannical leaders from just pushing their agenda in a session. So even when you have a really good bill, like my boss had one about geothermal energy, investing in geothermal energy, it's a great idea, but it just takes a while to percolate. That's an energy joke. The energy to the top so that people understand a new concept, right? So I said that bills have to pass both chambers in exactly the same way. And the general format for a bill is you file it, it gets read on the floor for the first time, gets referred to a committee, heard in the committee, it's got to come out of the committee, and in the House, it goes to the calendar committee and then hits the floor and then passes the chamber. Okay, but in the Senate, it goes on a specific calendar called general business, and then the lieutenant governor picks what bills are going to be heard. So that's one really big example of the power differential. In the House, there's a calendars committee. If you're on calendars committee, you're a pretty powerful person. They set the calendars. And then if the daily calendar goes by and your bill doesn't get heard, it normally dies or it gets pumped to the next calendar. In the Senate, all your bills sit there in limbo and you have to beg the lieutenant governor. Me. He picks out of order whatever he wants to hear. And okay, so higher level, this is Text Lege 201. The senators actually all have the power together to strip the lieutenant governor of every power that he has, practically, because each legislature passes rules at the very beginning of session. So the rules in the Senate that say that there's this calendar that you have to, there's a notice of intent calendar, that's the like beg me, and then there's the general order of business calendar. They could change the rule. They could completely change the rule and take the lieutenant governor out of that entire process. And then he wouldn't have the power that he has over them. And it just takes one more, it takes 16 16 senators. So it just takes a handful of Republicans to be like, wait, maybe I'm the boss. But they just can't do it. They've got like Stockholm syndrome. Like they're just like, no, this is the way it is. And I'm not, no, you can make this all go away, right? Okay, did I explain that? Okay, so it has to pass both chambers exactly the same. So the reason that bills succeed or die, right? One is that they're high priorities of leadership. And if they're high priorities of leadership, they're generally going to get a really good chance of passing. It doesn't mean they'll pass, and you'll see that happened during this last session. Like this election bill, right, did not pass. And again, the legislature set up to be purposely slow. So they're in session for, what was that? Meg mumbles, you're right, 140 days every other year. The first 60 days, they can't hear a bill on the floor. Okay, so for the first 30 days of session, you can't hold a committee hearing. For the first 60 days, you can't bring a bill to the floor. And then there are all these other timelines. Like you have to post, and the timelines are there so the public can participate, right? So a committee hearing has a 5-day posting period. And that gives time for people to get on their horses from El Paso, travel all the way to Austin, because heaven forbid we let you do anything electronically in this day and age, to testify. So again, these are all good. We want this. Then when a bill is out of committee, there's like 2 days. I'm not getting the exact numbers right, but 2 days that a committee report has to be available to the members before they have to vote on it, so we can read it, right? That kind of thing. So even a bill that the governor and everybody else wants has to jump through all those timeline hoops. And then people who oppose that bill can try to delay it along the way. So one way to delay it is in committee. I'm going to talk mostly about the House because that's where I've worked recently. But the members of the Calendars Committee in the House are remarkably powerful. I take away my earlier statement that they're not powerful. They are, because they place the bills and they can keep a bill from getting posted, and you never know why. And allegedly, like, one member can tag a bill or just be like, I don't like it, and that's it. Your bill just sits there forever. Again, I've never sat in that room. So those are ways you can kill it, and then you might purposely put it at the end of a calendar, right? 2 sessions ago in the House, there was the glorious Mother's Day Massacre, which, okay, tell me when I'm like too in the weeds.
No, this is great.
But there's also a calendar called Local and Consent in the House, and then it's called Local and Uncontested in the Senate. And those are supposed to be the bills that are, you're right, hello, a council member, Greg Kassar, they're uncontested. They're local and uncontested. This means let's name this bridge the Stephanie Chiarello Bridge, which of course they should do down here in Walnut Creek, or something like we should be able to pay for our driver's license with a credit card, right? Really silly things. So those calendars generally pass with like one gavel. Here's the calendar. I have 150 bills on it. Anybody have any problems? Great. So, but then there's a deadline to when you can pass local and consent bills. So 2 sessions ago, Mother's Day weekend, which they're always working the last 2 weekends of May, some of the Freedom Caucus, and that's spelled FREEDUMB, wanted to kill, I don't remember if they really wanted their Republicans to pass more abortion bills. And because they hadn't, they started killing the bills on the local calendar, which means you talk about them for 10 minutes. Okay, I know I'm so in the weeds. For anybody,
each one for 10 minutes. So it takes forever. That's the idea.
Right, and so normally you can ask a couple of questions about a bill, but if you want to kill a bill, you talk about it for 10 minutes on local consent. So that's what they did. So some of these wonderful bills that everybody agreed on died because they were purposely killing those bills. This session, I cannot remember what bill it was, but Donna Howard, Celia Israel, Gina Hinojosa. Oh, it was the bill about who are the rich people on Lake Austin?
Oh yeah,
right. They've never paid taxes, and they still don't want to. Well, so those members of the Travis County delegation killed that bill. I think it was Craddock's bill, bless his heart. So the very next day, Craddock killed one of Donna's bills that I think was like healthcare for newborns. I mean, something ridiculous. And it's all, like I said, junior high school.
Back and forth. Yeah.
Right. It just is. So you can't do anything in a vacuum there. So when you take your like stance, you got to be ready for the fallout. And that's what I try to tell people is you've got to elect people that you trust to make those tough decisions. And if that means that you get prenatal care for women on Medicaid past 3 months to a year, but I can't rename the blind salamander Stephanie Salamander, that's the choice they're going to make. They cannot be morally consistent in the legislature because they are trading votes whether they mean to or not.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to elect people that you trust to make those tough decisions.
So this is kind of what you're talking about with a lot of these things. It seems like I see this at the legislature a lot. I'm not a legislature expert, where it's just like there seems to be all these games happening. When you look, you can see everyone's on the floor and everyone has like at their desks and stuff, and everyone's moving around and who knows what's happening. But it does seem like there's a lot of these things, like you said, it's technically allowed, but a lot of the work is just like manipulating the system in some way to like get what you want or figure out your next play or whatever it might be.
Yes, it's just life. Yeah. So that's how bills die or succeed. Now you can bring bills back to life, which a lot of people do, and you can amend them onto other bills. Tons of people do this all the time. But I'll tell you, all the times I've been in session, I learned a really big lesson this time that I just can't believe I didn't know before. But I used to, when I would make recommendations to my boss on how to vote, I'd look back at how the committee voted. And so normally in the committee, it'd be like, okay, the Democrats voted for, the Republicans voted against, I think it's good. Well, nobody voted against it. Okay, it's fine. I didn't realize that even in committee there are these games. I mean, I knew they were games, but not on the vote. I thought that the vote was pure, and I was wrong. Because sometimes on the committee, people are like, well, I'm going to let it out of committee and we'll let the floor figure it out. While at the same time, in contrast, the floor's like, well, the committee liked it, I must like it. So they're both passing the buck to each other, and I don't know how anybody would really vote. Another example is my boss was on Ways and Means. And so you can't piss off the chair of Ways and Means, right? So if the Ways and Means chair had a bill in Ways and Means, you were going to have to vote for it, or else none of your bills would move ever.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are some of the really hard decisions. Anyway, back to amending. If the bill is germane, okay, which is the lesser known of the Jackson 5, but really what it means is that it's related to the bill. And then you're like, oh, this makes sense. This bill's about abortion. This bill's about, oh, no. It's not logic. It often has to be sure that you're amending the same part of code. So if I'm in the transportation code and I'm talking about parking meters, then I should also be able to talk about parking meter cops, I guess. I don't know if that's a good example or not. But I couldn't be in a bill about parking meters and then be like, and we need to get rid of the homeless. Right? Those things don't. So as your bill is dying in committee, you're looking for other bills that you can amend onto. You need to get the author to be friendly. They'll be like, I will accept this amendment or I will not accept this amendment. And that generally helps you. You will be sneaky. It'll be like 1 o'clock in the morning. People are sick to death. You're like, I had a simple amendment. And it's not simple, but nobody cares. And it's on the bill. There are other bills that we call Christmas trees. And those are huge kind of omnibus bills that have opened like the entire Health and Human Services Code. And so people just start amending bazillions of things onto that bill. So you constantly try. Then you think that you've succeeded because the bill made it out of one chamber. Got to do it all again in the other chamber with a whole new set of mean girls, right? And let's say you do finally get it out of both chambers. If it's not exactly the same, they go to conference committee, which means they have to work it out, right? And I thought that they really did like sit in a room and talk about things and like have therapists there. And it is not true. Generally, who's ever on the conference committee writes the report and asks you to sign it. And that's how it goes. Sorry for destroying that for you, Addie, Lou 3. They don't really work anything out in conference committee. It's all a lie. And then it goes to the governor, right, who has to sign or not sign it.
And who could veto it. And he does sometimes. Yeah.
Yes. And so I know that Frantogram wants to know if the legislature can override a veto. And the answer is technically yes, but no. Because based again on the timeline, the governor has 20 days to sign, veto, or let it become law without his signature. And so they purposely don't pass bills until he can wait until the legislature is gone after sine die to take action. So the legislature can override if they were in session, but they're not in session. And guess, Becky, who can call people back to session? That's right, the governor. So there you
Right. Yeah. And so we're in a special session. Can you explain what a special session is? So like you said, 140 days is a regular session. It's just once every other year. But the governor can decide, hey, you haven't done what I wanted you to do and bring them back, right? And so what's a special session? How does that work?
First of all, it's named wrong. It really should just be called like torture, torture, torture. And I wish that I had the Constitution drawn up, but I encourage you to look it up, because it says something like the governor may, when insurmountable odds are facing the state, right? Which means like the Indians are attacking, there's a plague of locusts, or all the railroad lines just blew up, right? That's what our founders meant about a special session. It's supposed to be a catastrophe of epic proportions. It's not supposed to be, well, you just didn't do what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I want to make that very, very clear. Now, Rick Perry and Governor Abbott have just turned this into, their torture chamber. I mean, this is how I try to explain what's happening right now to people. Is that there's a football game, okay, and I don't watch football, but I'm going to talk about it like this. And it only happens every 2 years, okay, and there are two teams, and one team has twice as many people on it than the other, okay, and this team, the referee works for this team, and the commissioner works for this team, and the news people work for this team, and they play the game, and guess what? This team wins by a bazillion. But heaven forbid, this cute little team, they won like 3 or 4 plays, right? So the commissioner, who's the governor, is like, fuck it. They're not allowed to win 3 plays. We're coming back. We're not going to play the whole game again. Just these plays, just these handful of plays with this little team of bad news bears managed to get on base a couple of times or throw the football. We're going to come back and replay it, right? So he lost. Greg Abbott lost. There was a game. It played for 140 days, and people didn't like him enough to pass his shit. That's the truth. Because they're in charge. Republicans are in charge. They practically have they can pass anything they want to in the Senate. They don't even need Democrats in the Senate, and the House is pretty close. So the fact that those bills didn't pass, I mean, bless those Democrats' hearts, it's not what we did, right? It's really not. It's that the Republicans are not as crazy as Greg Abbott is. Like, as a collective, they're not. So I just want to make sure that is clear to Kapalapati and Carissa Coe, right? That, like, you lost, buddy, you lost. And this is not what a special session is supposed to be. However, here we are, special session. Governor can call it. Only the governor can call it. Can't be like, you're really not supposed to call it for that. He's in charge. 30 days. It's 30 days max. And then he can tell you what's on the call, right? And so he listed his 12 priorities.
Right, of what kind of bills that people can focus on. And that's supposed to be all that gets attention paid to during that time.
Right. But here's another thing, like I was telling you earlier about the Senate and Stockholm Syndrome. The legislature actually, by the way, are separate, right? They are a separate part of our 3-tiered system. So what the legislature could have done, I mean, you'd have to question the constitutionality, but I want to say this too, like, you can do stuff that's unconstitutional. The fact that it's unconstitutional doesn't mean you can't do it. It means that when you challenge it in the courts, they'll tell you that it's unconstitutional, right? So get that out of your head as you're frustrated. So what the chambers could have done, because even though you're only supposed to pass bills that have to do with his call, they're in charge of passing the bills. So both chambers, so he vetoed Article 10 of the budget, which no one's ever, to my knowledge, vetoed an entire chapter of the budget. And that budget cuts my salary, not my salary, my salary, my benefits, my health care, because Greg Abbott thinks that I personally, right, thwarted all of his evil hopes and dreams. So he brought them back to session and was like, you can pass that, but you have to pass all these other shit bills, right? So what the legislature could have done, both chambers could have done this. They could have come in on the first day of special session. They could have suspended all their rules in both chambers. They could have repassed the budget exactly the same way they did. They could have sent it to the governor, and then they could have adjourned sine die. They could have done that and be like, fuck you. I hope you can cuss on Instagram.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, we could hear the calls we're getting from people who are mad at our bosses for leaving. So I'm cussing. Apparently that's okay. And I'll make a threat to you as well. Don't worry. They could have done that. They could have said, no. We make the rules, right? We're the legislative branch. I'm sorry you didn't get what you wanted, but you're going to approve this budget for our people, and then we'll talk. But they didn't, because they're really not as brave as I want them to be.
And so I kind of want to talk about, it's so interesting because you're a staffer and I feel like are totally in the crosshairs of what's happening right now. As someone, like you mentioned, when the governor kind of took a bit of retribution against the legislature for not passing what he wanted, it was it made it seem at first, I think in the news, like, oh, the actual legislators themselves, the ones that are in charge, would get their funding cut. But really, it was you and all the people who work there. And then now you have, what has happened now. Well, I guess I want you to explain a bit. But the Democrats kind of fled the state. And now who's left, I think, at the offices to hear the complaints and deal with the fallout is you and all the staffers as well.
They did not flee. They escaped from prison, Greg Abbott's prison. They escaped the massacre. They did not flee from a fight, okay? Because they didn't even have knives at this gunfight, okay? They barely had their knuckles, and like 50% of our members are over 60. Like, this wasn't going to work out for anybody. So they just used another tactic, another tool in their tool belt. And I know you're jealous because they came up with a better strategy than yours, but they did not flee, right? They escaped. So what was the question? What's happening?
Well, yeah, what's happening right now, and how did they, because I think you kind of touched on this, like, is this allowed? Is it kind of wink, wink allowed? And maybe if you could give a little context, because I know this is a tool that has been used before, but sparingly. So I guess if you could provide a little context too for how this comes up and what is happening.
Okay, great. So governor called us back for special session. He puts things on the call. And there was a long list of, I think, 12 of them. One of them was this budget, which I want to say it's not just staffers. First of all, it's not just Democratic staffers. So Republican staffers as well. Because the way the budget's written, it's like legislative staff. But there are about 2,500 employees in the state who are not just legislative staffers. We have an entire organization called the Legislative Budget Board. They do all the fiscal analysis for the legislature. They're lawyers at Ledge Council who write the bills, review the bills, help get the bills into the appropriate journals. I'm not sure if like the State Preservation Board, which maintains the Capitol, I don't remember where their budget is, but you're talking about people like me, and then you're talking about somebody who's getting paid, $12 an hour to edit documents. Like, this is a huge set of people. And I think that the budget board said $4.5 million in unemployment claims for Texans if the budget doesn't get passed again. So huge gamble. And again, not my boss. And my boss gets paid, wait for it, get us gigs. You're right. You know how much a Texas legislature makes? If anyone wants to comment. It's about $650 a month.
Big bucks.
Big bucks. So dear people calling me about your taxpayer dollars, I'll give it back. I can give you $650 a month. Okay. Now they do get a per diem. So yada, yada, yada. It's maybe $25,000 a year if they maximize their per diem. But it is not a lot of money. They're not getting paid a lot of money. And it's not cut because it's in the Constitution. And Governor Abbott just cut the budget. So right now we're in special session. He called us back on the 8th. They were there on the 8th. And then all these bills are moving really quickly. So there's House Bill 3, which I think is Senate Bill 1. I'm really bad with the numbers. But this is the election overhaul bill, right? Which really just makes it harder to vote. And it makes it harder to vote by how it lets you vote. So dear angry people who are calling me and cussing me out and telling me they hope I died, there's nothing about voter ID in this bill. There's nothing about it. This is about the hours, the ways you can vote, how people with disabilities can vote. I mean, like I was thinking about this earlier today. I was like, if we said that you could only vote on Instagram Live, do you think that would discriminate against some people? Yes, it would. I wouldn't be able to figure that out. And so that's what's happening right now is they're purposely making the way you can vote a way that makes it impossible for some people to vote. So all these things are on the call. And so the Democrats, I was not part of any of these conversations, but decided to leave because what the rules say is you need a quorum, and a quorum means 100 out of 150. Okay. And then they'll have a vote on the floor. You'll realize that there is no quorum. There were only 80 members on the floor. So FYI, there were Republicans who weren't there either. I will make that really clear. Republicans, right? Because they're at Disney World. Because guess what? It's summer. Nobody wants to be here, and we're not supposed to be here. So when people are like, come back and do your job. Well, guess what? I'm always doing my job. I know I'm going on a rant now. And my boss is always doing his job because it's not just the 140 days of making policy is a very small chunk of time within the 2 years that a rep serves. And what they're doing in that other time is constituent work, right? So when you filed for unemployment benefits through the Workforce Commission and you couldn't get through, you called our office and we helped. Okay, when something's happening in the city and they're fighting with the county, you're moderating that conversation. When somebody can't get the health care they need, you're calling up the local health entities and be like, hey, this kid Facebook messaged me like his mother has COVID, can you help? Like they are working all the time. They are at breakfast meetings, lunch meetings, evening meetings. Like they never stop working. So they're not working. They're just not making policy throughout the year. So yeah, you need to go back and look. You can, oh, by the way, you can watch everything that's ever happened on the floor by going to Texas Legislature online, TLO, and you can look at the archived broadcast. So I recommend looking at the ones from Tuesday, right, the 13th, and you'll see at the very beginning, the speaker's like, please excuse Reddy Smith, please excuse, and it goes through all these people who have excused absences. So yes, it's high school. You need an excused absence. There are a lot of Republicans who weren't there, right? 80, 70, that's like 4 Republicans who were not there in addition to all the Democrats who were not there. And there were some Democrats there. I think there were 4 Democrats on the floor, right? So there are even more Republicans not there. So please make sure to call them and tell them that they were not doing their job either. Thank you. So what was I saying? Oh, so they're in special session. This could have been done in a week or two if everybody just repassed these bills, right? But the Democrats realized, first of all, they blocked this bill in regular session. It came up at the very end, and then they walked out that last day, and because there were only 48 hours left, they couldn't pass the bill. Again, part of the rules. People do it all the time. And schmucky schmuckface, Lindsey Graham is talking about doing it at the federal level, right? Like, people do this all the time. They follow the rules for their advantage. So they're not there, which means they can't do any business. So no committee hearing can happen in the House. No business on the House floor can happen in the House because there is not a quorum. Now, the rules do state that the Speaker of the House can get the state troopers to come and get you. And so that's what he said. I'm going to arrest you. Like, I don't think they're going to throw you in the, like, paddy wagon, right? But they can come get you at your home or at your hotel, and they can bring you back to the chamber, and they can lock you in. So those are the rules, too. Those are part of the rules. So that's why the Democrats had to leave the state. And they have done this before. They left to Oklahoma. The Senate left to New Mexico. One was about voter ID, and one was about redistricting. So they've broken quorum before.
Right. And so the idea is the state troopers don't have jurisdiction in these other states, which is why they flee the state specifically. Go somewhere else.
Yeah, so there's a great book. I don't think I have it out anymore, but it's called The Killer Bees, and it's when they first, they actually just stayed in Austin. It's a fun book. It's in the 70s. Lloyd Doggett was just barely a House member. And what I remember from reading the book is it was pretty much in somebody's guest house in Terrytown. There were like 12 guys. Can you imagine? And, you know, there were no cell phones, and, you know, somebody's sleeping in the, it's a fun read. So that's what they've done. They've escaped from a massacre And they're going to have to come back to it at some point. But think about how bad it had to be that these people would sacrifice their day jobs, because remember, they only make $650 a month, their livelihoods, right, which is also their day jobs. What I meant to say was their families, right, and then their political clout. I don't think they're going to destroy their careers, because they are representing their constituents. When they leave, that's what their constituents wanted them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But you saw that Joe Moody lost his Speaker Pro Tem title. They'll probably lose their chairmanships. Now, the rules right now don't say that, but they'll pass a new rule.
Right.
Right now, I don't want to surprise DKO Bellin, but titles like Speaker Pro Tem are just I mean, Sweet Joe Moody, who I love, there was no extra power. It was like deference to him.
Mm-hmm.
The same way the dean of the Senate is a man whose last name is Whitmire, because he's been there the longest. He doesn't really have any power. And side note, neither do vice chairs. Okay. So fine, take my title away. It doesn't matter, right? But
mm-hmm.
I think the scariest thing is that you just can't have a conversation anymore. Like, what I would have liked to have seen is for Speaker Phelan or somebody to be like, you know what, I overreached, right? Like, mm-hmm. I lost this game in the regular match. I tried to have a rematch, and you know what, I overreached. Come back. We'll just pass the budget. We'll work these things out next session. But there's just no humility. There's no ability for self-correction. There's no compromise, right? I mean, so that's another reason I have a lot of respect for the Democrats who left, because they get beat up every day on that floor right now. Every day during session, when they go to the floor, they get beat up because they're a minority. And then again, they had a couple of little victories, and then you ask them to come back to get beat up some more, and they were just like, you know what, it's like blue on black at this point, right? Like, you're giving me gruel with worms, and you're like, next time it's going to be cold, right? It's still gruel with worms. And that's what they said, right? Like, it's so bad that you making it worse just isn't enough for me to stay.
Mm-hmm. It was a breaking point a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, when you're talking about all this stuff, I think one thing that's so frustrating for, a lot of Texans, or, I do a lot of work at the city council level, and really passionate about, I feel like I can honestly tell people, like, it's great to get involved at the city level. Like, you can get things done. You can talk to your local elected official. A lot of them are cool people. Like, you can talk to them and go to a meeting, and like something you like might actually happen. At the legislature, it feels so frustrating and like so crazy. How do you even follow it? There's all these games happening. Like, not that there's not politics at the local level, but at the legislature, it just feels like so amped and so difficult as a regular person. So like, I guess first I want to know, like, what advice you have for people who are like fired up about what the legislature is working on, good, bad, or whatever, in some way or another. Like, how do you engage with this body? And then, like, two, I'm curious how you stick with it. As obviously this is your job, so that's part of it, but like, does it break you down? Like,
yes. Okay. Here's my advice.
Mm-hmm.
Do more than nothing. And that's been my advice for a long time. And the great women at the oh my God, Rouser, who have the Rabble podcast. Right?
Yep.
Sit on their podcast once, and they run with it, and we keep running with it. Do more than nothing. Don't get like, what's the best thing? Do one thing, and you've already done well. I feel like the state legislature is just as accessible as the city legislature. People just don't know that. So especially here in Austin, you can walk into that building. It's an open building. You can walk up to your legislator's door, and you can walk in. And if it's non-session, your Austin people will probably be there. And if it's during session, everyone will be there. So there's a sweet little intern up front. Be nice to them. They're Gen Z. They have no idea what's happening. They're very young. And then you just say, I'd like to speak with the legislator about childcare, right? And they'll probably be like, oh, the legislator's not here. Would you like to talk to our policy staffer? Right? And that is decorum in the House. With the exception of the Freedom Caucus, you can walk into anybody's office and talk to a staffer about what you care about. You just can. I had a friend who was at the San Antonio airport, and she texted me and she's like, oh my God, I'm sitting next to Speaker Joe Strauss. And I was like, go say hi. And she's like, no, 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 no. I mean, he was one of the 3 most powerful people in Texas, just like on a Southwest flight somewhere. I mean, they are that accessible. You can try to make a meeting with them. And there's a district office in everybody's home district. So there, you'll see that brown sign on the highway that says,
Yeah.
right. It'll say John Turner. Well, go to the district office. That's what they're there for. You. And sometimes you just walk in the office and the member's there, and they love this shit. They love talking to their constituents. So if you catch them, just start talking. You gotta change what you think a win is, and I think that's one of the hardest things for us as advocates. You're not gonna change people's minds about the really big bills, the culture war bills. Those are decided the second they're filed. That doesn't mean don't write notes, make phone calls, come to committee hearings. It's just recognize that your work is not to change the outcome of the vote on the bill, but your work is to be active, and by being active, you get other people active. Right? I get 3 people. It's a pyramid scheme. That's what it is, right? So you get 3 people involved, you get 3 people involved. That's what you're doing, is that you're shining light and you're bearing witness to the craziness and the atrocities of the Texas Ledge, or the really good things, right? But that's what you've got to change, what your end game is. So if you write a letter, you're a winner. If you come and testify at a committee, double gold stars, right? Like anything you do that's more than nothing, you're helping, and you have no idea. It's that ripple effect. You have no idea how you're going to help.
Yeah. And it might be a smaller issue, like, maybe if it's not like one of these big culture war issues, but something that's important to your smaller community that the legislature can impact, you might have a much more legitimate, higher chance of making that move.
So much. So if a legislator is doing their work long before session, they're meeting with stakeholders about ideas, and they get ideas from themselves, from their staff, from community people. And just a constituent can be like, hey, I noticed that I can't get a license. This is a bill I worked on, that he was a disabled medic and he couldn't get a license plate that other disabled vets could get. And hey, we changed that, right? Because he just sent us an email and we're like, hey, this doesn't make sense. So yeah, on those non-culture war ones, you should be able to read a bill and be like, you know what, I'm actually a teacher and I know that this is going to be a problem because, and you can go to the author and be like, hey, can you change this? Because this is what happens. They'll be like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that, because I own a pet store. Right? And so that's why you'll see, I'd say that 95% of every bill that makes it to committee is a sub. That's because people have read the bill and they've made changes. So on those non-culture war bills, you can have amazing impact. And so that's what I'd recommend. If you want to be really effective, is find you're only gonna have wins in those moments, and they'll make a bigger difference later on, right? You got to invest in those moments now. So you're doing 2 things. One is you can impact these other things, and the other one is you're doing your pyramid scheme to get more people involved. Those are the 2 things that you should be doing. Why do I do it? I must really like pain and suffering. I'm talking to my therapist about that. But I think that I've always been a fighter, and I'm in it for that fight, and nothing brings me more joy than this, than helping people fight for themselves, right? So I might not be able to stop an abortion bill, but when somebody calls me because they can't get a parking place at ACC because they're disabled and there are not enough parking places, and I can call and in 30 minutes fix it, I've just changed somebody's life. Like, it seems little. Or when somebody calls because they can't get in touch with their son who's been in prison for 2 weeks, and nobody will help them, but I can call the warden because of my position, right? I mean, I just help people get over these hurdles that for them they couldn't solve, but because I work for a legislator, I can. And so I just focus on the smaller constituent things. Well, I'll tell you one other story. This woman calls our office and she's like, oh my God, my daughter lost her wallet and her passport. I don't know how she didn't lose her phone. Okay. But she was overseas and she needed to get to the embassy, yada, yada, yada. This mom is like beside herself. The congressperson isn't helping them. And I just was like, was there Uber? in wherever I can't remember where, in like Bangladesh or something, right? I was like, well, is there Uber? So I called the Uber lobbyist. Guess what? There is Uber. They picked her up and they got her right to the embassy. Now I think she's lying to her mother about a lot of things, but whatever. Right? So like we get to problem solve for constituents, and that's the joy. And I just like, out of my cold dead hands, I'm going to keep fighting, for equal opportunity for everyone. And I just want to make it through one. I just need one session where the Democrats aren't in charge. But I will say, power corrupts. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Our problem right now is that we have one party with too much power.
Mm-hmm. Right. I guess that's the issue. Yeah. And then that hurts that leads to more of the gameplay, I guess. Either way. Yeah.
Right. If Kate Blanchett couldn't wear the ring, I can't either, right? Do you like all the references I've made? Have I done this?
I love it.
I'll work on it. So yeah, and you want people to get along.
Mm-hmm.
But just be human. Just be human. We also have redistricting coming up, by the way. That's gonna be fun.
Yeah, let's see. We're getting close to the top of the hour, but I wanna let's touch on that really quick. Redistricting, just so people have that seed planted in their brain and know to look out for it, because that'll be the next drama that I'm sure we'll be reading about.
Yes. So after the census, which of course this last census was a cluster, sometimes there are more people in Texas than there were 10 years ago, or there are less. And since you're supposed to have equal representation at all levels of government, they have to redraw the districts from your federal House member districts down to I think city council or school board even. So they redraw the districts based on the number of people. And so this is the big debate you hear about gerrymandering. People who ever have power are going to try to protect their seats. So they draw districts that purposely give them enough voters. And you're not allowed to draw a district based on partisanship per se, but you do use election data, you use population data. And so what you'll see is sometimes people will put all the Black people in one district, versus if you had split them in two, they might be able to get 2 representatives. Sometimes you sprinkle people out too much so they can never get, I can't remember the 3 ways they're called. It's like packing, stacking, and flacking. I don't know, look that up. So that won't be fair either. But it'll be fun.
Yeah. And the legislature is in charge of drawing those, and that'll be another special session probably this fall. And, like you mentioned, so the redistricting one is I don't know, I'm super passionate about it, because it's that's a fundamental democracy civic thing. It would be great if we had districts that seemed fair to people. And again, it feels like this huge redistricting, I believe, was another time that the Democrats fled, walked out, use whatever term you want, because there was so much trouble there. Any tips on engaging with the redistricting process? I know that's a controversial one, but what should we keep an eye out for?
Well, I think redistricting and voting, right, are the 2 key ways to have change. And then, voting is related to redistricting. So there should be a hearing in your district. You can go to the Texas Legislature online, or just go to your members page and see where that's happening. And then there'll be hearings at the Capitol. So there are many districts where the neighbor across the street from you is not in the same district that you're in. So you can go and make an argument about your community. And those are very impactful. Again, you might not change how the districts are drawn. The redistricting is always challenged in the courts for years and years and years. So anything that's in the record is useful. So if you have an email, from a member that's make sure that we don't get those crazy liberals from the South Methodist Church in Austin, it's wait a second, right? And if you say, I live in a community that goes from here to here, and we get together for a barbecue every Thursday because that's how awesome our neighborhood is, and this plan divides us into 4, that's also very powerful, and it will help the courts, the higher courts, make decisions about what the districts are really going to look like. So I think redistricting is a very important way to get involved.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, well, we're about an hour. I don't want to take any more of your time, but thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We're going to post a link. You have a really great Google Doc kind of accessible thing of Texas Ledge 101, so people can check out this information. Any other last minute things people should follow? I guess probably follow your reps, follow Over the Ledge. Any other kind of last minute tips to keep an eye
Yeah,
out
follow
for?
the hashtag TextLege, TXLEGE. Sign up for a TLO account, Texas Legislature online. If you're overwhelmed by searching for your own bills and the things you care about, pick organizations that you trust to tell you what to do. Right? Like that's a really easy way. Texas Tribune, in my opinion, is a
Mhm.
news source that is very neutral, does a very good job. Trust the Texas Tribune, talk to your friends, and start your pyramid scheme. Like you too can change the world just by telling 3 people about this Instagram live.
Love it. All right. Thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
This
And
really lifted my spirits because I've been getting angry, threatening phone calls for a week. And so just knowing I can do something positive and helpful has lifted my spirits. Thank you very much.
awesome. I appreciate it. I love everything you're doing. And for
You
everyone
too.
listening, we'll post this so you can share after. And if any other questions come up, just leave us a comment and we'll try and make sure we answer them. Thank
Thanks
you.
so much. Ooh, how do I get out of this?